And headline political stances signal a showdown that might likely scuttle the embryonic Building Bridges Initiative Task Force report, whose drafters hoped for a political consensus. In Embu County over the weekend, more than 40 lawmakers met and made clear their position to a referendum. The opposition, of course. In a joint statement, they said Parliament was competent to handle the process. With less than a week after President Uhuru Kenyatta unveiled the report and called for mature political debate, can the BBI offer Kenyans a clean political break? We'll be discussing that with Anthony Bulima, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association, equally political commentator. Anthony, thank you. Good evening. I do appreciate your time. We have had similar reports, of course, for different purposes in the past. Just a matter of citation, the TJRC, the Krigler report, the Waki, and the Ndungu Land Commission report. And now we have the BBI. A week later after the unveiling, we are seeing political mathematics being drawn and red line political stances being drawn in the country. A clean political break or another false start?
It's both. And let me start by saying thank you for having me in your show. What we have in Kenya today is a political moment that is unfolding on a day-to-day basis. What the BBI has introduced us to is an opportunity for politicians to either fall out, as you correctly put, and some will be forming new alliances that will allow them to introduce new levels of cooperation, political cooperations. Courtesy of BBI, now you're seeing more members of parliament who were previously in the opposition associating more with those who are within government. It is during the BBI's launch that we saw for the first time an opposition MP having to moderate through a government function. So BBI is a political moment in this country and is literally reshaping the political landscape. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the kind of realignments that we are witnessing today is just a tip of the iceberg. There are more that you're going to see. There will be serious fallouts, and guys will have to go separate ways. And BBI is that concept that will definitely draw the line that separates the two factions in the 2022 elections.
And but perhaps that does regard then, talking about the near puncture point of the ruling Jubilee Party, and here to be specific, because I just want us to unpack from this element, is about the issue of kicking the can down the road here, because there's no guarantee and assurance that the BBI will remedy the political climate in the country. And owing to the past experience and the sequence of the committees that we have had, or the task forces that were put into action, some constitutional, we still never had some sort of political calm and sanity in 2013 or either in 2017. So what is the assurance here?
BBI in itself is not an assurance, because we've been in these moments before. In 2007, 2008, moving to 2010, we were in a similar political moments, and everybody thought that the redemption of Kenya had finally come with the 2010 election constitution. But years later, we're still looking back and saying that we never got it right. I still feel like we are not very honest with ourselves, and the politicians are still playing to their own personal and selfish interest. And hence we are missing out on an opportunity to entertain a national conversation that can reorganize how we relate and actually give birth to a more meaningful Kenya that it means well for the citizens as opposed to the leaders. And if you go by the spirit behind the BBI, which we trace it to the handshake, if we sustained everything at that level, whereby two principals who are political protagonists opted to shake hands and, forego their own personal interest for the sake of the country, then introduced us to a process that is called the BBI, created a task force that has gone around the country, 47 counties, talking to Kenyans and asking them, how would you like the new Kenya to look like? This task force comes and they launch a report in the name of BBI report that seeks to probably articulate what Kenyans said. And all of a sudden, you're already drawing daggers, and we are saying, some Kenyans are saying that that's still not exactly what we said. Others are saying that is precisely how we want the country to look like. So I feel like what is for Kenyans, you will actually see it in Kenyans. And I think BBI, if at all it focuses on just addressing the politics of our country, it will never be able to live to see the daylight. because you never solve the political problems in Kenya within one incident. You know, like, for example, say that we have this document that is going to address the entire problems in terms of the politics of Kenya. I don't think BBI could be that. BBI is just an opportunity for us to reorganize how our politics will be played in 2022.
Okay.
And I think for us, for Kenyans, a kawaida Kenyan, this should be an opportunity for you to now try and locate what is my interest in the baking of this new cake. So that now, if, say, for example, speaking for the young people,
yes,
they can properly articulate the whole idea of unemployment and actually say that our only interest, even as the political class think about positions, our only interest is that if you can incorporate a component of either a youth program that yes, properly addresses unemployment and is well entrenched within the constitution, then those are the type of conversations that Kenyans should actually be playing to. Because right now, as we speak, we're already caught up. If you listen to most of the Kenyans, even when they do random interviews, you will notice that most of them don't even care. They're just saying, let our leaders read it, let them tell us what they want. But I feel like we can use this opportunity to turn it around and say, okay, fine, we like how our leaders are reading the politics and they want to reorganize the executive structure. But Kenyans now use the opportunity to now make new demands that make more sense to the common mwananchi, as opposed to just playing to the politics that we are being dragged into. Because I don't think we're having the kind of honest conversation that we ought to be having as a country,
okay,
as at now.
Given that, and then the main question therefore remains, or what Kenyans are asking themselves, they do of course remain extraordinarily cynical about the conduct of the political establishment in the country. Therefore, why is it that a decade later we are back to the drawing board? The simple answer that the politicians have failed to answer, members of the political establishment, because we seem not to address the source point of the problem here, which is very fundamental and healthy if we are to move forward. So rather, the principals here of the handshake decided to rewrite history instead of dealing with the deep-seated problems. Therefore, there is no assurance and guarantee that 2022 will either be safe, because perpetual cycle of continuity of electoral violence occasioned by electoral crisis can still be very much on the table.
You see, Ayub, what we should be asking ourselves, what exactly is the problem that we're trying to address? And that is well captured.
Ethnicity?
Yes. Ethnicity, those are the symptoms. We are not dealing, those are actually how do I describe them? More of the problem, but we are not dealing with the problem from a curative point of view. And this is what I mean. During the handshake, when Right Honorable Raila and President Uhuru walked out at the steps of the Harambee House, and they pointed out that they reflected and realized that the challenges in Kenya are deeper than we think. They pointed out one major phenomenon that I think throughout history we've never addressed. They said that they have realized that we have tried to solve the problems of this country, only that our focus has been on what they described as the hardware. You can find it in their communique. But we have never addressed the software issues of this country. The software issues cannot entirely be dealt with reorganizing how our leadership is. Probably that could be a measure that we use to invite people to the table, but I don't think is the exact measure that you can put in place and say, I'm walking home knowing that a problem is solved. Today in the morning I had a meeting, and in one of our conversations, part of the analogy we used was, if you have a problem and you're able to solve 80% of that problem, then you're only left with 20%. You could as well rest and say that 80% of the problem has been addressed. Where I'm driving at, or this analogy was, we were using it to justify. If you look at how the entire document has been crafted of the BBI, it has left out the important segment of our society, and that is the young people who are unemployed, who are disenfranchised, who are the people who are supposed to be the custodians of our future. But they've been deliberately left out, and where they are mentioned is in a very passive way, but we are not exactly saying that what exactly are the measures that government will put in place in the next Kenya that will ensure you no longer find a young person who's disenfranchised. Those, to me, are the software issues that we can address and leave for a Kenya that we'll be proud of tomorrow. But you see, now we have reduced all this big picture into short-sightedness, and we are now focused on what I would describe as non-issues, you know. We have previously tried the whole idea of reorganizing the composition of the executive. It has not worked.
Yes.
That's why we are going back to the drawing board.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and we are going back to the drawing board to ask ourselves, is it really the political issues that we are not getting it right, or it's more than the political issues? And what is coming out is that it's more than the political issues. The only problem is we are solving this problem with the same mindset that created it. And the mindset that created it was a political mind. So we have inherited that very ugly way of solving our problem and, you know, introduced it again. We are going back to our partisan nature of politics. That's why you have Tanga, you know, clearly articulating and a position that they know for sure will not be popular with the Team Embrace and Kieleweke. So what you'll have is a compromise, which would be a political compromise, but not a Kenyan compromise.
Okay. Given that, the question is therefore, or it remains unclear whether the document that presented its report to the president is pretty comprehensive here when it comes to the sense of all-encompassing mechanism, and it brings Kenyans under one umbrella. And therefore the question is, if the two principles, even by the unveiling of the report, there are deep divisions, and prior that we also saw some who have been watering down the task forces sittings across the country, some calling it the Beba Baba initiative, some calling it the Blue Band initiative. So the divisions are still rife and are continuing, and are further exacerbated by the succession politics of 2022. Even from the onset, before it's converted to a bill to be taken to Parliament for further discussions, we seem to have deep political problems, and that crack continues to widen. So how do you cure this problem even before we step into 2022 for the crucial vote?
I don't want to actually see it as a problem, because it's a healthy conversation, you know, that you have a document here
that angers the president,
yes,
because he seems to be calling out people. He says,
I think what angers the president most is the levels of dishonesty, because at some point, I think he had hoped that this can be a step towards Kenyans having honest conversations amongst themselves and reducing those conversations into tangibles that can help us define the next Kenya. But what we have are politicians who are doing what they're good at, you know, discrediting a process that ideally is a foundation. They actually say a good idea is one that you can use to produce a better idea. BBI is a good idea because it's born out of the idea of trying to reconcile communities, reconcile the country, and put us in one very strong, formidable box that can then, you know, reshape how our country looks like. But what we have is the selfish, bipartisan nature of our politicians who are hijacking what would ideally be a very positive step towards the right direction. What I am saying is, what angers the president the most from my reading of the situation is when you are a head of state and you're trying to make a move, inviting people to the table, people who've previously been waiting for decisions to be made for them. But then what you receive are back and forth that do not necessarily reflect the good intentions. That will definitely anger you. And Ayub, let me say that as a country, we must not shy off from talking to each other, but not at each other. Because the Kenya that we are trying to build is a Kenya that embraces the differences in terms of ideas, but the unity of purpose for our country. And I think that's what the current document, the BBI, which I personally consider is a decoy, is trying to introduce. Because if you ask me, I don't think that's the comprehensive document that these guys, the task force had actually gone to do. My own reading of it, because I've gone through the document, I've tried to pick segments that would properly bring out, you know, a new impression of what Kenyans are saying, but I'm not seeing anything different. I'm seeing a lot of the status quo. I'm seeing a lot of what is being practiced, and that's why you'd find like some of the senior leaders within our country, including the Court Secretary General, at the very earliest opportunity, pointed out and said, in as much as we've warmed up to this idea, we don't feel like we've actually reached our destination. Our destination must be more than what this document is currently offering. But again, you have those proponents of the status quo who, like I said, hope to benefit from the current situation maybe in the coming years. You don't expect them to oppose this arrangement. So that's the nightmare. That's the dilemma we are in. We have a political class that does not necessarily want to allow themselves to think beyond the next election, and maybe introduce new features that would, you know, help us shape a better Kenya. And they are stuck on what is in it for me. in the coming years.
In your view then, I mean, we seem to be having a case of deja vu, isn't it here? When you talk about the content of the report, and that might, in your view, might not be what the original recommendations were, what do you think then might have been the changing point, or manipulated or infiltrated the task force?
It's very difficult to tell, but you know, this task force is born out of the executive, a government that is functional and is active.
A president and the opposition chief.
Yes, and what you know is that this president and this opposition chief are politicians who are doing it at their best. So probably my own interpretation would be they read the mood, because already even before the BBI was launched, already guys, the different factions had already pronounced themselves on their various positions.
Okay.
So the president and maybe Right Honorable Raila decided, let's play to their tune, and let's give them what they're asking for, but ensure that there is a clear disconnect in the Kenyan populace. So that's why the BBI was launched with so much hype. But if you look at even the arrangement in terms of the people who spoke in the program, a lot of it came out in such a way that there was some level of dissatisfaction. And that dissatisfaction has infiltrated the Kenyan spaces. And people are beginning to say, this is not actually what we were looking for. And let me tell you, in the coming days, the politicians will shape this narrative to suit the exact intention of BBI. And I don't think we are there yet. What we have is a blueprint of what the true BBI should look like. And watch out for the coming days. The true BBI will have a structure that accommodates communities. The true BBI will have a structure that is able to reorganize even how the cabinet is appointed. The true BBI will have structures that have a place for governors who are exiting the political scene.
Okay.
And the true BBI has already been alluded to by Raila when he spoke in one of the devolution conferences.
That was in 2018.
2018.
Kakamega Devolution Conference. Yeah. Given that, and when you look at the nature in which, in itself, the BBI, of course, the task force was not immune or wrapped up in immunity, or was not cushioned, because they were at the behest of the two principals, who, according to Paul Mongi, one of the task force's leading person, said, in the event we hit a snag, then we don't shy away from getting back to the president and the opposition chief, Raila Odinga, in terms of seeking some advice. Therefore, it wasn't cushioned from the onset or wrapped up in immunity. Therefore, is it a case of predictable solutions for unpredictable problems in this country?
Not necessarily, but yes, you could be right, because we know it by their pronunciations in various forums, public forums where they've engaged. They've been very clear. In fact, the president, his last speech before the BBI launch, he literally preempted and alluded to the position of an executive prime minister, and made it clear. In fact, he said it at his backyard, that I am not doing this for Uhuru Kenyatta, you know. If we are going to reorganize the executive and create the position of an executive prime minister, it will be for Kenyans and other people. So that in itself tells you the level of engagement that the task force had with the two principals, because don't forget that they're the ones who literally drew the terms of reference for the BBI task force. So they were very clear in terms of their mind what the outcome should look like. And they know it to date, what looks like success, what success looks like, and what it doesn't look like.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. On that note, then we hit the break. When we come back, we'll be sampling some of your feedback on Twitter. The hashtag is, of course, News Compass, as we head into the last segment of the program here. And we do thank you for keeping us company here on the program. Stay tuned. We are coming back after the short break here on News Compass. Welcome into the second and final segment to sample some of your feedback on Twitter. Masinde the Craziest says, after realizing he has no legacy to leave behind, since he hasn't honored his previous campaign pledges and can't implement his Big Four agenda, President Kenyatta is now trying so hard to force the BBI down our throats, to leave a legacy, in quotes. A woman says 10 billion can add quality in our healthcare system. Of course, he means the money spent by the task force. MPs can pass or amend the BBI thing. At the end of the day, it doesn't trickle down to Wanjiku or the common Mwananchi. Kenya is known for great policies that are never implemented. Well, to sample some down, Kwangu says, I wonder how many people are fighting corruption when themselves are inflating it. And how can you use 10 billion Kenya shillings to type a report of 156 pages? Typing 156 pages, just one page rather, he means that one letter, typing A, one letter, he says, has been used 6,000 Kenya shillings. That's what he means. That is multiplying by 156 pages, meaning each letter is 6,000 Kenya shillings. Final one here from Mike Omoshi says, Uhuru and Raila have carved out a scheme to divert attention from what it actually is happening to Wananchi. To this, the BBI now you are being diverted to a referendum and the revision of both the BBI and the Constitution. I honestly don't see an end to this in the near future. The concerns here that we continue to hear from Kenyans. Anthony, then the question remains, NASA is on deathbed. That is according to Senator Moses Wetangula. It's oozing political blood. The Jubilee Party appears to be having personnel problem, and we have this thing coming perhaps to cure, according to the initiators, the political problem in the country. Then in terms of doing it, in terms of implementation, putting it into course of action, Parliament or people?
I think that's a question that will be best answered by the judiciary, because the grounds for people versus Parliament are very clear and well defined in Article 255 to 257. And for it to go to the people, there has to be some sort of reorganization of the structure of the county, and we're talking about devolution. There has to be reorganization of the structure and the functions of Parliament. Mm-hmm. That in itself would automatically go to the root of the people. If it is to stay within Parliament, then it means it has to be very plain in such a way that you can convert it into a bill, and then it's tabled in Parliament, debated, and finally enacted. But what we have with the report is it gives a mix of both, because as you realize, the functions of Parliament as defined in Article in the Constitution includes representation, legislation, and oversight. Mm-hmm. If you were to bring a prime minister who's going to be active in Parliament, does that amount to reorganizing the representational function of Parliament and even the oversight? Okay. Because this is an executive coming into Parliament to be a bit more proactive. If you're going to have cabinet ministers coming from Parliament, does that also readjust the functions of a member of Parliament? Those are the dynamics that I think need to be debated in a court of law, so that it gives, the judiciary gives it interpretation that can then guide the process. But for as at now, I agree with the position of the Speaker of the National Assembly that it's too early to arrive at a conclusion that is going to be automatically a process through Parliament. I think we'll be lying to ourselves, because if you ask any lawyer, if you get 1, 2, 3, they will give you totally different answers. If it was clear that it's supposed to be a people process, the lawyers would have almost the same answers. If it was clear it was supposed to be a parliamentary process, the lawyers would have the same answers. And I think that the two principals also played smart. They realized that if they don't present a document that can go through the people route, then they risk subjecting a process to Parliament, which automatically would be easy for manipulation. And that's why Raila's remarks from the onset was that, why don't we take this to the people? It cannot go to Parliament. He was very clear. So it means, and it gives credit to some of our assertions, that probably they had prior knowledge of what this document would look like. So I would tell you that people or Parliament is a decision from Justice Maraga.
But the point is that still, while that is subject to an interpretation in a court of law or from a court of law, that debate is very rife in the political establishment. Last week, during the launch of its new house, the ODM contingent said this must be people-owned. But they are the allies of the DP, William Ruto, among them Moses Kuria, who has clearly said that we have spent 10 billion Kenya shillings collecting the views from Kenyans, and then you want us to get back to Kenyans regarding this report to spend more than 20 billion Kenya shillings in the referendum process. What do you think is the suspicious line here that the opposition, or to be specific, the ODM contingent had or have regarding the bill, the conversion of this to bill, taken to Parliament for purposes of approval, and then later adoption because of Parliament's sinking integrity?
Yeah, I think we all know the challenges in our Parliament. Of course, there are quite a number of members who are very honest, but there are also quite a significant population that is not as honest. And I think the fear that most of the proponents of it going the people route have is guided by the incident during the security bill the tax levy on petroleum products, how they conducted themselves, that in itself gives the impression of this process might not gain the type of credibility that most people would want if it goes the parliamentary route. And I think there is credit to that type of argument. But having said that, I don't think we must really concentrate on just the money issue, because I think we'll be very dishonest. This country loses billions to other things that don't benefit Kenyans. This is one thing that I think can be of benefit to Kenyans, because it's Kenyans speaking to themselves and asking themselves, is the current type of leadership structure that we have adding value to our lives? And I think we cannot reduce that to just a question of discussing billions when we lose billions to corruption and we say very little about it. So I would not quite agree with Moses Kuria on that, because I think he should spend more time advancing conversations on how to save on the billions that we lose on corruption, other than questioning the billions that would be spent on a process that, collects the views of Kenyans to inform what kind of governance structure we want.
And when you mentioned that, because there is also debate on the reputation aspect here, because there are some who feel that the parliament's reputation is rather one that continues to dwindle because of the allegations of the 10,000 Kenya shillings received in the toilet. That was a matter looked into by the chaired committee of the Privileges and the Powers Act of the committee chaired by the Speaker of the National Assembly. And do you feel that we are on the cusp of change then here regarding the parliament or the people's way, either way, and looking at the general sense of addressing issues that have importance to the Kenyan Mwananchi, tackling poverty, inequality, combating regional development imbalances, tackling unemployment among the young people, particularly the youth in the country who make up a bulk of the population, consolidating national cohesion and unity, addressing transparency, accountability, and impunity that continues to be rife in the country, when we have generalized the entire argument of the report, the 156-page report, to political interest that will only serve until 2032 and then 2027. In between, we're not having the debate on what actually happens to the common Mwananchi. Are we diverting the attention totally?
Yes, we are. And I think, Ayub, going by your question in terms of the conduct of Parliament, it's very easy for me to just fall into the temptation of just focusing on the negatives of Parliament. But rarely do we also take time to look at the outstanding leadership that comes out of Parliament on certain occasions, like the Senate has, in many occasions, conducted themselves in a manner above board. But having said that, of course, there has to be room for improvement. There is a lot of misgivings that has occurred in Parliament that has never reflected well of the type of a Parliament that this country wants. But equally, there has been some very positive strides insofar as the conduct of some of the members is concerned, to an extent that Kenyans have given them very high rating appraisals. But having said that, and building on what you have alluded to, the whole idea of why are we shifting the conversation? The conversation must go back to the 9-point agenda that was identified by the two principals. I think they conducted themselves as nationalists. But when they start playing into the political gimmicks and dynamics that are already unfolding, then they are diluting this very good intention. And I think that's where my fear is, because Kenyans are more interested in those things that really are about improving their lives, as opposed to those shenaniganism that goes towards satisfying the selfish and greediness of our leaders. And I think if you read the mood in the country today, our people are frustrated. They are not the Kenyans of 1963 moving forward, because the Kenyans of 1963 were celebrating the heroic deeds of their leaders. The Kenyans of 2019 are a frustrated lot. They're complaining every other day because the leadership that we're getting does not respond well to the expectations of the citizenry. And, Ayub, they say, a blind man cannot lead blind people. What we have are people who are blinded by their own egos and selfishness, and they're missing out on an opportunity to lead a people who are willing to go to the Canaan that NASA has been preaching about. So I think the problem in our country is the political diversions that occur on every opportunity for us to make sense of our country. And I think if this country was to be advised right,
yes,
we should resist that at all cost. Like literally resist it. a politician comes to talk something outside what you expect, you resist it. And I think that's the Kenya that we should be raising. Because what we have, Ayub, today is a very dishonest space. People using the citizen just to manipulate them to pursue their own selfish goals.
All right.
Minus the citizens. And any process done outside Kenyans is not a process for Kenyans. BBI means well.
Okay.
The handshake means well. Those were good gestures.
Okay.
That is, the two can only be likened to what happened in Kenya in 2008, when we were just coming fresh from post-election and we could not talk to each other up until the National Accord came. And the National Accord gave us a new sense of hope and told us that you can actually work towards building consensus and working together as a country. BBI has presented a similar opportunity. Are we going to squander it again at the cost of political?
All right. Yes, go ahead, please, finish up.
Yeah, you know, just for political purposes, I think we must resist that. And I think the drivers of that resistance must be the young people, not the likes of Miguna.
Okay.
Because Miguna also seems to be missing the point. But if you can have a population of young people who are very conscious about a country that they want, and they are very intentional about their steps towards it, we will make more sense. What we have today is a reward system that rewards mediocre and deprives of, you know, ingenuity and the whole idea of people having to manifest the best of themselves. And we as Kenyans must actually use BBI as that opportunity for us to recollect ourselves, put together our minds, and actually chart a new Kenya for ourselves, not for politicians, because our political class has shortchanged us time and again. The reason why this new constitution, the 2010 constitution, has not worked is not because of Kenyans. Kenyans embraced it, and they are very hardworking people. But the political class hijacked what was a very good document. They have diluted it, watered it down, and submitted to Kenyans' misery. But we have an opportunity to revisit that and actually say, where did we get it wrong in terms of our leadership?
Hopefully then we can undo the political problems in the country. Anthony Bulima, a good end to equally a good discussion. I do thank you for coming on board. Thank you so much for gracing us here on the program. And final comments here on Twitter. Sheila says, the BBI report has been presented to Kenyans for further discussions. Who says they may not want a more powerful Prime Minister's post than proposed by the BBI task force, of course, an appointee of the president. Ian says Parliament only route to actualize the BBI report. And this is Francis who says, until the owners of the document decide that when it is the point for it to be presented in Parliament, then the procedures both under the Constitution and the standing orders will apply. He quoted Speaker Justin Muturi of the National Assembly. Peter Toro says, if you look through the document, a lot of the proposals in there are really by the way of policies. If it is about the implementation of the standards and ethics, we already have the Ethics and Integrity Act in the Constitution. And final one here from Mike, he says, Uhuru and Raila have carved out a scheme to divert attention from what is actually happening to the common Mwananchi. We earlier looked at that tweet. Let me sample the final one here on the program. And this is a quantification that will be as a result, which might not cost Kenyans if Parliament lives up to the billing and bungle the report for expediency. That's according to Warren 254, who is concerned about of course, Parliament handling the Building Bridges Initiative Task Force report. Thank you for joining us here on the program. We'll see you again here on News Compass next week by the grace of God. Good night.